So number 3. What was your question about it? Or what was the part that you didn't?
It started with B because the quantity of software labor demand they had decreasing by 24%.
Okay. So this is the one we had, what, elasticity. All right, elasticity demand. What's that, Chelsea?
Well, they give you price elasticity, but they don't give you any elasticities for like labor, so I don't understand.
Okay, so no agglomeration, they give you these assumptions. The price elasticity of demand is 1.5 negative. And suppose the wage of the software workers increases by 20%. All right, to answer that one, you need to know a little bit about assumption number 2. What does that mean?
The capital and labor quantities can't change on the isoquantity where it's consistent with that ratio.
Okay. And how does that help us out with this problem? So fixed, these are in fixed proportions, right? So assumption number 2, labor is responsible for 80% of the production costs, first of all. So assumption number 1. Software is produced with fixed factor proportions, no capital labor substitution. So we got the elasticity of demand. So part A was what? The price of the software will increase by this, and the quantity demanded will decrease by what?
16.
So how'd you get that?
Take, since the increase in wage is 20% and labor makes up 80% of the cost, you take 20% times 4 bids, you get 60% increase in price.
Okay, so that's one of the catches there. Do you guys see that? Did you understand what John just said?
No.
Labor makes up how much of the production?
80%.
80%. So 80% of the production cost is in labor. Labor cost goes up by how much per unit? 20%. If the price of the product, is $1, is capital,
So it's 4 bids for labor.
right?
Okay.
So now I have a 20% bump in the wage. If that goes up by 20%, and assumption number 2, which is what? What's assumption number 2? Look at your
no software labor.
no capital labor substitution. Now normally when there's an increase in one resource, what do businesses tend to do? Substitute away from it, right? And if there's something to substitute into, hey, labor's getting kind of expensive, let's buy a machine to do it instead of human hands, right? So that substitution goes on, and that's not allowed in this particular model. So it's a simplifying assumption. So if this goes up by 20%, then how that's going to translate to the factor price, again, I just normalized this example to $1. How that's going to affect the price is that it's going to be 80% of it. And there's your 16%. Okay? Now, part B. Any questions on that? You got to kind of get, so that first part kind of lays the foundation for the rest of the problem, really.
Well,
but you got to understand
half
that
part.
factor substitution
Yeah.
part.
That's only half.
What's that?
That's only half of part A. The other half has.
Right, with the quantity change, right? Okay. So then we've got negative 1.5. Percent change in the price is going to be 16%, which is an increase. What is the percent change in quantity? 16 times 1.5 leads us to the percent change in quantity equal to 24.
Yeah, it's big.
And it's a negative, yeah. That's fall of 24. So 16 times negative 1.5. So quantity's going down. Remember, this is our output market. So there we're facing the law of demand on the output, where we just have a 16% bump in price leads to a 24% decrease in quantity. So that's just law of demand, elasticities, good old-fashioned price elasticity of demand. But we're adding this additional linkage here through the inputs. Okay, so that covers all of part A, correct?
Right.
Everybody good on that? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Yeah.
Okay, part 2 then, part B. The quantity of software labor demanded will do what? Decrease. Why?
Any change in production costs is passed on to the customers at a higher price.
Okay, so how much is that going to fall by?
Do what? That's
So what is the quantity of software labor demanded? So now if we're thinking about our supply and demand, we're actually in the labor market and the demand for labor and the wage.
so.
Wages go,
Wait,
how do we,
sorry, I was looking at the wrong one, I think.
okay,
Maybe.
Wages went up.
Yeah.
what's that?
Wages went up.
Wages went up by 20%. So we had an increase here of which was from our somewhere. Where did I calculate that? Here. That was given to us. All right. So how did we get the quantity? Take a guess. You know the answer. Take a guess. Since I gave you the answer, you know the answer. Think about what's staring you up here on the board and try to backdoor yourself into the answer.
It's 24. Oh, because it is the fourth assumption. Because if it's in the price, then pretty much the percent change in the price is also the percent change in the wage.
You're close, but it's on the quantities.
Yeah. So I'm saying the elasticity of demand down there, you can have the percent change in the price, which is, right?
It's not on the price. We calculated the quantity of the product fell by 24%. Go back to assumption number 2.
Because the ratio must have constant, the amount of product fell by 24%.
Yep.
Then it's going to also fall by 24%.
You got it. Because it's fixed factor proportions, then capital's going to fall by 24%, and labor's going to fall by 24%. It's a physical thing, right? I take if I change my example around here, it takes 80 people and 20 machines to make whatever 1 unit of product. If I reduce this by 24%, I reduce this by 24, I reduce this by 24. It's all fixed proportions. Okay? So that's the part B part. That rests on that fairly restrictive assumption, by the way, of the fixed factor proportions, and that's why we relax it later. Okay, everybody good on that? So fixed proportions is the production technology. If we were to look at the production function as a function of capital and labor, whatever this ugly monster is turns out to be in these fixed proportions to the amount of output. So our parameter on capital, just to give you an example, might be 80 times K plus 20 times L gives me my unit of output. And so that's going to be fixed each time. Okay? A very simplistic production function. Does C and D come together? Anybody, as long as we're on this one, any C and Ds?
See, makes sense now that I know what you're doing. Sure.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think that was the tough part of it. Other than this is the one where part D was if assumption 2 was relaxed.
Okay, so is it actually supposed to be assumption 2 as opposed to assumption 1, what they ask in the book?
it would be assumption 2. So if what would happen to the number? So if from our answer here, if assumption 2 is relaxed, the demand for labor would be more elastic because an increase in wage would cause the substitution of capital for labor, which is what we were talking about earlier. If you jacked up the wage on me, I'm going to seek substitutes. And one of our things for that affects the elasticity of demand, whether it looks like demand curve A or demand curve B, is the availability of substitutes. You jack up the price, I'm out of here, right? So there's a more elastic response if there's factor substitution available. So that was allowing there to be substitution, was that one. Elasticity of demand for the software labor, then we just got the ratio of the percentages. So that turned out to be 1.2. 20% change in the wage and 24% change in quantity. Okay, good on number 3? Next, somebody said 10. Okay, let's look at 10 here. Consider the results of a consultant's report on possible economic impacts of moving the Raiders, or the Raiders, a professional football team to Sacramento. The consultant estimated the team would increase total spending in Sacramento economy by 61, computed as follows. They put this little analysis together. The use of the city's average multipliers based on 2 troublesome assumptions. So what are the key elements, or what those assumptions are? You guys have the answer key. Which what are the 2 things that you should probably kind of know for Thursday with that multiplier concept? What drives this idea of even having a multiplier in the first place?
That money from, like, money earned in the area is also going to be spent in the area.
And it is spent in the area, right? Kind of those 2 basic principles is what kind of drives that multiplier result. So if we have money coming in from outsiders, because people are flying in from other areas to spend money in Sacramento at the game, then that money is one sort of injection. That was kind of our comparison of export goods versus local goods. If we have a good that we're producing in our city and our stadium or our production plant brings in new jobs, those people tend to live in our city and that money stays in the city from goods that people are buying that live outside the city. So you got this influx of money into town to the resource base, and it gets spent. Those people go get haircuts and buy pizzas and that sort of thing. So that was one element to the multiplier. Okay, and then those same people need to be living in the area is the other part of this problem. So if the employees aren't living in Ottawa, they're living in Lawrence, then bringing in Ottawa University to the town of Ottawa doesn't necessarily have the same multiplying effect, because we're not capturing all those dollars aren't staying within our city.
Didn't we also say that, like, there's something to do with while the citizens were at the games, they were unable to be productive in other ways, they're not spending their money? Is that another assumption?
It is, yeah.
Leisure good, it's kind of a local good into basically being a substitute local good as
Right.
opposed to a substitute export good.
Right. They're yes. So there's substitution by the locals. Yeah. And was that part of this wizard thing?
That ended up being part of the assumptions that it wouldn't make money. It didn't.
Oh yeah, which plays into that same concept potentially, or is an argument to that too.
They're
Yeah.
pretty much related.
Yeah, because if you're taking money away from the local movie theater just to go to the game and you're local, then that did nothing for spending. Okay. Other ones on this homework. Which one?
So 9 was kind of tricky. but-
9?
So I don't know, I don't think there's anyone else can go over it.
What about,
Is that the one?
7?
It's the tax.
7? Yeah, that you did something on 7, didn't you?
Sorry.
So 7, consider a city with an equilibrium wage of $80 per day, equilibrium employment of 100,000, and 100 million square feet of housing. The government's growth control policy fixes the maximum number of square feet in the city at its current level. New housing can be built, but every square feet of new housing requires the 1 square foot of old housing be retired from the market. All right, so how did you draw these curves?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kinked, but quick question, is it supposed to be kinked upwards?
Why?
So it's supposed to,
Steeper and then not
how is that?
Steep and then steeper.
So we got the
Should be,
regular old supply curve.
Oh.
because that's, we haven't seen.
What are we measuring down here?
Wage, or quantity. Quantity of labor.
Quantity of workers. And here we're measuring the wage.
Yeah.
So how did you kink it?
Peak it upwards.
So upward so that it's vertical,
Not completely
like this?
vertical, but
It should be very inelastic though.
yeah, it's-
Why?
Because
Go ahead, Michael.
Uh, Wait, why is it completely or?
That's why would it not be? I just asked, is it vertical? Both you guys said no, and you're both starting to talk, so I just picked you.
actually it should be vertical.
Okay, John.
I mean, it can be pretty much vertical, but I would, saying something's completely inelastic is a pretty extreme case.
Are we assuming that?
What's the assumptions of the model?
Fit for everything, so yeah.
Yeah, but
Okay.
is that assuming that if you build a new space, you can't add a person to it?
That's kind of the way here. Does that make this? Is it essentially freezing the amount of workers?
I wouldn't say so. You can destroy a one-person house and build an apartment complex.
Okay, so smaller. That'd be one answer, right? So it is square feet. 3,000 square foot home becomes 3 1,000 square foot homes. So that's a possibility. Okay, so we could have more married couples instead of singles coming to town, right? Since there's a premium on the amount of. Why would the wage start to look like? Why would it need to be commanding higher?
Because anytime you add in more stuff, you're going to have a much higher housing price because you're going to have to factor in the cost of demolition and creation.
So if we were instead to look at either number of houses or amount of square feet, this one right here looks like this, right? The supply of square feet in our town has that look. The supply of houses probably has some sort of upward tilt to it, because that's just going to restrict eventually we can't have 200 square foot houses, right? We can't keep demolishing and putting up more. If it's square feet, no matter if we go vertical or whatever, we can only make them so small before it's not livable. So even this would probably eventually get kind of weird looking, but this would have some slope to it. And the thing that you need to add in then is demand. What does that do to prices over time? As the city starts to grow, or the demand for housing starts to drive up prices real quick, right? Price per square foot goes up really quick. So if we think of dollars per square foot, if we think of dollars per house, no matter how we slice it, price of housing is going up. So what do people need to be induced to come work in this stinking town that has this government regulation? They need higher wages to pay for the higher housing, right? So that's all kind of tying in together with the housing. Okay, so some sort of kink there at the upper end. And what else do we have here? The supply curve under the growth policy is steeper. Add 2 labor demand curves to your graph, an initial demand curve and a second curve representing a 20% increase. Okay. So, anything big there?
No, I just want the graph drawing.
Was that the main thing you wanted to cover, Kate?
Yeah.
Okay.
On E though,
Yeah?
when it talks about the consumption per worker,
So under the growth policy, an increase in demand for labor, what happens to equilibrium employment? The housing consumption per worker, because housing prices are higher. So under the growth policy, demand for labor increases, equilibrium employment. So it was talking about what happens to equilibrium employment.
yeah, it was the second part of
Oh.
the consumption.
The housing consumption per worker increases because housing prices are higher.
And it's like the percentage of its wages is what I took out of that answer. It's like they consume more of the house via their wage.
Yeah.
versus-
The total amount spent on housing goes up. Yeah. So if we think of our consumption of goods is price times quantity, total expenditures on housing for the city would be all I households from 1 equal N to I. So if housing prices are being driven up, and as demand goes up, housing moves to the right a little bit, even if we have to demolish some houses, but especially that price effect is driving it up.
Somewhere there'd be more money.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on chapter 5? Okay, it looked like I got at least some of your stuff for review tonight, so I'm just going to give you a last reminder to pick out some problems. How many people turned them in? I saw at least 3 or 4 of you, right? The review, 8 o'clock tonight.
Will it be at your house or here?
Here.
Okay.
I guess that'd be an idea, but I don't have a nice whiteboard. You're not able to make it, Michael?
What?
You're not able to make it.
I am. I just have to tell somebody about it.
Okay. All right, well, we're just going to kind of start a nice, easy introduction. And we actually did this last time with a little bit on that video that we watched. There goes my club.
We're starting in chapter.
Yes.
I thought we were.
Tonight's the review. Yeah.
I thought you said in the class you're still going to be review as well.
You're gonna review chapter 5.
Review chapter 5, that's what we do. So we're going to do number 6. Just kind of a light intro, kind of builds on what this stuff is, and then we'll review all you want tonight.
Do you want our homework at all? And then
I will check it quickly. I want to get it back to you. So at the end of class, I want you guys to hang on to that. So I'll just give you a quick look-see over and so that you keep it in your hands. All right.